welcome to today's podcast edition of Cause for Action. Now, for many of you listeners who listen to us on a regular basis, you know we talk about core legal reform issues like class actions, third-party litigation funding, and arbitration. But today, we're actually highlighting an important topic that adds to the meaning of legal reform, and that's the issue of diversity in the legal profession. And I think we can all agree that when you pull together a diverse group of lawyers with different backgrounds, with different life experiences, you really build capacity for better outcomes. So what do I mean by that? This means quicker issue spotting. It means developing smarter legal solutions for clients, and it means better lawyering. So a lot of really good things when it comes to diversity. And to help bring light to this really important discussion, we have with us today Howard University School of Law Dean, Danielle Holley-Walker. Now, the dean has a pretty accomplished background. In fact, she's a rock star in my book. She's earned a BA from Yale University, her JD from Harvard. And after law school, she clerked for the Fifth Circuit. She practiced at Fulbright and Jaworski. And she also worked in the academic world in North Carolina. And now she serves as the dean for Howard University Law. Now, Dean, despite your impressive accolades, what I find really interesting about your background is that you grew up in a family of lawyers. And if I got this right, your dad was a practicing attorney in Houston and did some teaching at Texas Southern.
So he was a full-time academic. So I grew up from a family of academics. My dad is a law professor. He's been a law professor for 50 years. He started his teaching career at SUNY at Buffalo, but he spent almost his entire career at Thurgood Marshall School of Law at Texas Southern University. And my mom was also a professor at Texas Southern University and Texas A&M. She was an accounting professor. So I kind of grew up in the higher ed university world, but definitely a world surrounded by lawyers, as I spent a lot of time in my childhood running the hallways of Thurgood Marshall School of Law, which was really one of the main kind of places of my childhood.
Okay, so I've got to ask you this question. What was it like at the dinner table? Were you getting the full Socratic treatment from your dad when you were growing up? Like, hi, honey, how was your day at school? And then the Q&A kind of flying from there?
Absolutely. So not only is he a law professor, so he teaches criminal law and evidence and criminal procedure, but he's also a specialist in critical thinking and pedagogy, and set up one of the first centers in the United States on pedagogy in the legal profession. So he used all kinds of different pedagogical methods in our home, which included things like the Socratic method. So for example, if you came and you said, I don't want to play soccer, right? He'd be like, so what are your reasons for not wanting to play soccer? It's too hot. It's Houston. I don't want to get dirty, blah, blah, blah. And then he'd really delve in and be like, why do you think it will be dirty? Have you ever experienced how it feels to be dirty? Might be good, So he was definitely, law professor all the time in the best way possible, around our house. And my mom was the same.
All right, I'm going to have to try that with my teenage kids, because it's usually a one-way discussion as opposed to an actual back and forth.
Absolutely.
So thanks for that tip. Now, you have such an interesting background with varying experiences. Tell us a little bit about your current gig at Howard University Law School. I mean, what is the day in the life like for you? Whether it's the summer where things may be a little slower, or when you're full speed ahead once the academic year starts in earnest?
I have to say, I feel like I have one of the best jobs in the world. I kind of got into academic leadership work. I was the associate dean at University of South Carolina's law school before I came to Howard. And the reason that I got into academic leadership, or what some people call administrative work, I don't like that term. I like to call it academic leadership work. But how I got into it is I really wanted to help more students. I loved being in the classroom, loved teaching, but I felt like I was only making an impact on the students who I saw. So a day in the life for me is really, working with all parts of the university community. I work with the president and provost a lot. I work with my decanal colleagues around the university. I do a lot of meetings talking about the incredible nature of our student body and what we can bring to the workforce. So meeting with law firms and other legal employers about our students. I work a lot with our students, both as a faculty member. I teach. So I teach in the fall first year course called Legislation and Regulation. I teach almost every year. This year, I'm teaching a really exciting course in leadership. lawyers as leaders to second and third years. So I spend some time teaching, and the rest of the time I'm really, working with faculty. I call myself for faculty. I'm, kind of the head cheerleader and coach. So as we bring in new faculties, we work with senior faculty, really working with them on teaching, scholarship, and service. And then, with staff and faculty, with staff also kind of giving them a lot of direction and supporting them as they do the important work on behalf of our students.
Yeah. I remember my first day of law school, it was civil procedure, and I was absolutely terrified. I remember the case that I had to read. It was Penoyer versus Neff.
Yes.
Don't even remind me about what the holding was. But we had this old crusty law professor who just had everybody stand up and address the entire class. And of course, I'm sitting in the back of the class, and that's the absolute worst place to be. So when it comes to your teaching style, do you require your students to stand up and address the class?
I've never done that. It's so funny because civil procedure, it's so funny that I taught civil procedure for years, and my civil procedure professor was a legal historian named Christine Desan. And she's really someone who I still emulate a lot in the classroom. She was very exacting, challenging, but she was also herself, which was essentially, friendly, approachable, not wanting to intimidate as she taught, right? Which is, I think, that kind of paper chase style that in our generation, that's what our professors were known for. I think now when we talk to professors about getting their own teaching style, I always tell people, be who you are, right? Outside of the classroom, but just with more focus inside of the classroom. So I try to keep it conversational. I do light Socratic method, meaning I will call on a student and talk with them about the case, not in an attempt to intimidate them or make them feel like they don't understand, but to illuminate what are the things that other students may not understand and kind of get to those core questions. So Socratic with the idea, which it always has been, but sometimes it's a little bit more intimidating. I try to do it for illumination more than intimidation.
Yeah. Well, for our listeners who don't know, the U.S. Chamber and the foundation that we have, including the Institute for Legal Reform, entered into a partnership earlier this year to do a number of things to really open up opportunities for the legal talent coming out of Howard University Law School. It starts with the endowment of 3 academic scholarships for the 21-22 school year, and then also bringing on a legal fellow over at the Institute. And we're thrilled to have Ryan Duff with us, who's been doing a terrific job ever since June. And so we're very encouraged by this partnership because we do see opportunities moving forward. But, when it comes to the scholarships, one of the critical areas that we were particularly interested in was your ADR, or Alternative Dispute Resolution Certification Program. And I was hoping that you could tell us a little more about this program, what it means to students and what it means for your organization.
That's fantastic. Yeah, I'm so excited about our partnership with ILR and our ability to really talk about our alternative dispute resolution program. So we have an incredible faculty member. His name is Homer LaRue. He is a longtime mediator, arbitrator, and his passion is really alternative dispute resolution. So a few years ago, he proposed the idea of us doing a certificate program, which means that we have students who graduate from Howard with a JD, but also a specialized certificate saying they've been specially trained to do ADR. They have the opportunity to do incredible externships, like one with the World Bank. They do a 40-hour mediation course. One of the reasons we wanted to do this is we know that African-American lawyers are only 5% of the legal profession, and they're even more underrepresented in key areas: alternative dispute resolution, intellectual property, corporate law, especially mergers and acquisitions, and other areas. And so we really developed a focus in those areas. So ADR was one of those areas because we want to, as Howard's Law School, serve the profession and create more lawyers of color, especially Black lawyers, to be in these particular fields.
I mean, everybody knows that litigation can be a very costly, time-consuming proposition. So things like mediation and arbitration are certainly, innovative and good ways of resolving disputes that, take out those massive transaction costs. So we're We are thrilled to be partnering with you on this initiative.
Absolutely.
And look forward to working with you in the future. Now, you mentioned a little earlier about the lack of diversity in the legal profession. I think the number that kind of sticks to my mind is that, according to the ABA, only 5% of lawyers in the American legal profession are people of color.
Right.
And that number has remained relatively static for almost 10, 15 years. You know, we've talked about this in the past. I mean, what do you think is causing this? Are there some structural barriers that we ought to be looking at? Or are there other issues at play here? Because these are really unacceptable numbers in a world that's becoming much more diverse, where there should be more and more opportunities.
Yeah, thank you so much for that question. I think that when we think about diversity, and this is one of the things that I always like to start with, it's really a question of representation and underrepresentation from the population. So for example, African Americans are 13.5% of the United States population, but only 5% of the profession. So what we're really talking about when we talk about diversity in any profession and in the legal profession, we're really talking about getting to numbers that represent what we look like as an American community, right? So that's the goal, is to have more confidence in our legal system through representation, but also, as you said so importantly at the top of this podcast, to have better decision-making and decision-making that really benefits clients. And that can only come from building diverse teams. So I think there are a lot of structural barriers, and that's a really important way to frame this question. Some of the main ones are, number one, access to high quality K through 12 education, which then leads to access to high quality higher education. We know that students have to be well prepared to even begin to think about law school, which is why we need more structural interventions like creating pipeline programs that focus on middle schoolers, high schoolers, but also making sure that we don't throw up barriers to the profession, some of which we see in terms of cost of legal education, but also cost of coming into the profession. There was a great article written by a number of deans and legal experts yesterday about how the bar exam itself, for example, can be resource barrier because it really depends on students taking off multiple months to study, also paying for very high cost prep courses. So we have a lot of structural barriers like that to more diversity in the profession. We have to identify them and then begin to confront them with meaningful interventions.
Yeah, that's really interesting insight. I remember taking the Maryland bar, and I took an entire summer,
Right.
taking Barbary courses, and it's a pretty intensive period of time. And that's even during law school. I took a lot of the classes geared towards the bar exam. And so when you think about it, not being able to have the ability, the time, the resources to do that does present a significant structural barrier, because you ultimately want to pass the bar in order to be a practicing lawyer, for sure.
Absolutely. And I think a lot of the things that we think of as just part of our profession, right, are things that have built-in barriers to increasing diversity. And so we really need to look at everything from preparation that would get students ready to apply, all the way to how we think about admissions and how we prepare students to take the LSAT, to looking at the support we give students while they're in law school, including keeping the cost of legal education low, and then issues like the bar exam. So all the life cycle of what it would take to make someone a practicing attorney, we need to examine every aspect of that process in order to figure out what are the key structural barriers to increasing diversity, and then just making, kind of clear commitments as legal educators, as legal employers, as people who govern bar admissions, to change a lot of those structural barriers to increase diversity in the profession.
Yeah, and I do think that the business community at large has an important role here to play.
Absolutely.
Especially when it comes to developing the talent pipeline. And it starts with, rising second year, third year law students, those who are going through the process. I mean, do you see a good amount of participation at job fairs or at recruiting events at Howard University Law School from from in-house corporate counsel, or is it mostly the law firms who are looking at summer associate positions?
Yeah, I think at this stage, what we've seen is that most of our recruiting is done in that traditional law school way by law firms who
Right.
come in and want to hire students. I think the good news for us is that the business community has made it clear to their outside counsel that
Yes.
they believe that their teams of lawyers who work with them as outside counsel are better prepared and get better results when those teams are racially, ethnically, sexual orientation, gender diverse, right? So I think the message from the business community saying that to law firms then translates into those law firms coming and recruiting at schools like Howard. So I will say that I'm really, really hopeful and optimistic because I have seen the incredible buy-in of law firms at Howard. So we have over 180 law firms that come and participate in our on-campus interviewing. We have another 150 nonprofits, and we do have more and more corporations. And I hope people listening to this podcast will come and talk to us about how they can get involved. So places like Apple, Amazon Studios, other places that even though they're not going to hire our students directly out of law school, they want to be able to train them, make them familiar with their corporation so that they're creating a distinct pipeline into their general counsel office and other parts of their corporation where lawyers work and do really important work within their corporations. So you can come to your law schools, and I encourage you to partner with HBCUs, especially because we know that HBCUs are a critical part of creating diversity in the profession. Partner with us to see what opportunities there are to help train lawyers before they graduate.
Well, Dean, you should know that, and this is very timely because we've had a number of very meaningful discussions with heads of litigation, general counsels, heads of compliance with many, many major US companies. And I think that there is a genuine interest to create more of a foothold in the recruiting process with law schools. So more to come on that. We'll
That's
talk
excellent.
but also, you talked about law firms, and many companies are purchasers of legal services, and so there is clearly, as I talk to, corporate America about diversity in the legal profession, there is clearly a consensus that having genuine diverse teams is important. And I think some of the issues that the business community is dealing with is, how do you actually make sure it's a truly genuine diverse team? And I'm hoping that you could talk a little bit about that, because I think that there's an evolution that's happening here where, the purchasers of legal services are very serious because they know that you get better outcomes when you have diverse legal talent with different backgrounds. And if you can comment on that, that would be helpful.
I love that terminology that you just used, genuine diversity, right? And I think that is one of the questions, for example, and one of the concerns that my students always express when they're recruited, right? Is this corporation, is this law firm really interested in genuine diversity? And when we talk about genuine diversity, we're talking about things like making your associates of color your real partners in the business part of what you do. So if you meet with clients, if you're thinking of who will take on this book of business when I leave, make sure that your associates of color are included in that. I think one of the most surprising studies that I've read related to diversity in the profession is one that talked about feedback time and looked at the just huge disparity in the amount of feedback that associates get at the end of the year, showing that associates of color get much less time on their annual evaluation, meaning that they are getting less meaningful feedback, partly because there's not a real investment, right? And a lot of this is completely unconscious, right? So when this study was done, the people who participated were shocked that there was any difference in the amount of minutes and also what the associate experienced as real feedback on their writing, on their dealing with clients, on their work in terms of service to the law firm. And I think we need to see real investment and commitment. And I also think that what graduates of law school are looking for is meaning in their work, right? So if they feel that they're not getting real opportunity pretty soon after they walk in the door, they're willing to change jobs to get that kind of real opportunity to experience genuine diversity in the practice. So in order to retain this highly talented group of attorneys, these attorneys of color are highly sought after. They need to feel meaning in their work. And that's the other thing that I think we've seen a lot of law firms and other legal employers working on, is how do we make sure that, we are empowering our young attorneys to make sure that they have great work and that they feel like they are the future of our organization, not just a diversity hire for the next 2 years,
Right.
but let them know that they are the future of the organization. And that's what I think the next kind of iteration of our diversity work really is.
We've spoke about this in the past, but I'm hoping that you could give some insight on mentorship. As a young law student goes to a law firm with a summer associate job for a few months, or becomes an associate and starts out his or her legal career. What are the do's and don'ts of mentorship, or some of the best practices that our listeners should consider, as they're building out their own efforts to diversify when it comes to the legal profession?
I love talking about mentorship. It's one of my favorite topics in the profession. I think one of the reasons that I love being a lawyer so much and love being in the profession is because I had great mentors. So of course I had my dad, but I also had the judge that I clerked for, Carl Stewart. Some of the professors I had in law school, I went to a very large law school, so I had a little bit less opportunity to develop some of those mentorship relationships. But over time, people like David Wilkins, it's one of my professors in law school, has mentored me throughout my career, meaning up till today. And so that's one thing that I say. And Dean Rob Wilcox from University of South Carolina was one of my most important mentors. I think what I tell students and what I tell people who want to be mentors is open your mind to the possibility of who you would mentor and who you would be mentored by, right? I think one of our kind of tendencies in many professions is when we work with diverse populations, when we're working with Black students and Latinx students and Asian students, to try to pair them with people from a similar racial and ethnic background. Gender, we also do this, and I think it's a mistake, because we know that those kind of affinity groups typically will get together in the workplace, support each other informally. What we haven't done a lot is give people who are not traditionally in the organization a chance to be at the center of the power of that organization. So why doesn't the managing partner take on a mentee who is a person of color, or the head of a particular practice group? Make that person who has a lot of access to clients, a lot of power, make sure that they have the opportunity to develop a mentorship relationship with their associates of color. But I also think mentoring is organic. I think one of the other things that we're discovering as we get further along in mentoring, it's very difficult to have assigned mentors, and those assigned mentors end up being meaningful. You can assign them, but you need to let the relationships develop organically. So put people in situations where they can meet people who aren't like themselves, and then really encourage people to take on the assigned mentor, but have the people choose each other. So mentor choose mentee, mentee choose mentor. That tends to be more effective, because what we see is that there's more buy-in from the mentor, more buy-in from the mentee. But that requires some changing, I think, of how we've traditionally thought about mentoring relationships in the workplace.
Well, for those law firm partners listening and watching this video podcast, please take the dean's words to heart. They seem very, very accurate, timely, and just makes a whole lot of sense. There should be diversity in mentorship as well as in the legal profession, right?
Absolutely. And I'm always happy. I tell law firms all the time, our law firm partners, to talk with them about mentoring, and also give the people who are being mentored a really good place to express how the mentorship program is working inside of your corporation or inside of your law firm, right? Because I think sometimes we don't ask for that feedback, and we hear, and yet all of the mentees are saying, oh, wow, I haven't talked to my mentor in 3 months, right? So the mentor program is not doing as well, but we're not getting that really honest feedback because none of the mentees want to rock the boat, right? So we need to find ways to, kind of give opportunity for open feedback, about mentorship programs, and then making the necessary adjustments.
Yeah. Well, Dean, the law school, the law students there at Howard University Law School are very fortunate to have you at the helm, leading the school into a post-pandemic world. I understand that school activities will be starting in earnest. Is it next month?
Yes, so we are returning to in-person classes. We will be a fully vaccinated community. So I think anyone who's listening who hasn't gotten vaccinated, please do that. We want to be in a safe environment, but we also know the importance of in-person instruction. It's critical to how we're a small law school with a very focused mission that requires us to be kind of in contact. Community building at Howard is a huge part of how we do our work. So it's important for us to be back in person. Our first year show up August 6th, and then everyone else shows up August 16th. I am beyond excited to see my colleagues, to see our staff, to see our students in person. I have a whole group of 1Ls I taught last year who I've never seen in person, and I'm so excited to have the opportunity to see all of our students in person and get to just more informally interact with them. I don't have to schedule a Zoom meeting to talk to them, outside or inside. I have an open door policy. So students pre-pandemic just stopped by my office all the time. And I got to talk to them about their job searches, who they were talking to as mentors, what their summer jobs were like. And I'm just looking forward to returning to that state of just getting to talk with faculty, staff, and students in the hallway and find out how they've been doing and what we can do to make their experience even better at the law school.
Fantastic. Well, so I have one last question to ask you. We all know that Howard University's mascot is the bison.
Yes, go Bison.
The bison, go bison. But I also understand from Ryan, our legal reform fellow, that the law school has a nickname, and that's Hustle. And I figured that's probably an acronym for the
yes.
school. But tell us a little bit about this nickname and everything that surrounds it. I mean, how did this come to be, and how did the students embody it?
Yeah, so Howard University School of Law ends up being Hustle. And I have to say there's a little bit of a generational divide. So now I'm going to say some internal politics here on the podcast. But our generation, the older generation of Howard Law alums, does not like the term hustle, right? So the students tend to say you're hustling at the hustle. It represents, I think, for people who use that term, what it represents to them is the grit and the hard work of our students, our faculty, and staff. So we don't have a lot of resources at the law school. We try to keep our tuition as low. It's half the price of what it is at another private law school. So we had shirts a few years ago that said, in the toughest times, we don't flinch, right? So that's what hustle really stands for, is this idea that we are a hardworking, gritty, really willing to get our hands dirty community. And I think a lot of that springs from our legacy in the civil rights movement, right? That the lawyers and the faculty, staff, and students of Howard Law became the backbone of the litigation movement from the 1920s all the way up to the 1970s, spearheaded cases like Brown versus Board of Education, and every other famous civil rights case you can think of involved Howard lawyers. And so that spirit of the toughest challenges in the United States, the reform of the US Constitution, the taking on of helping to diversify the legal profession, we are willing to do the hard work that will take us there. Hence, we are always hustling at the hustle. And yeah, so for the people who don't love that term, I get it, but I think it really represents that hard work, can-do spirit that is represented by Howard's Law School.
Well, and it seems that's the very type of character you want as somebody in the practice of law.
Absolutely. And our students really embody it. I think our faculty and staff embody it, but our students, many of them come from backgrounds where they have no resources.
Right.
First generation college students, first generation law students, they have no safety net, right? So because of that, their legal education is very tough. And so we don't want to take that for granted. And I tell people all the time, it's one of the things that makes our law school unique, is that we really have to help provide some of that safety net. Sometimes we're not able to because of lack of resources, but we recognize that we're a community where it's a struggle for people to come to law school, get that degree, pass the bar. And, we are proud of the fact that nothing's coming easy to us, but we have to work really hard and we get there every time.
Well, Dean, I can't thank you enough for the time that you've spent with us to share your thoughts, your insights. It's always great talking to you. We look forward to continuing our partnership. Best of luck to you with the new academic year. And by all means, for all our listeners, please pass along this podcast because it's really important stuff for the corporate community to hear about. And with that, I will bid everyone an adieu. Thank you all.
Thank you so much for having me.
Take care.